Tucked away in the green heart of rural Oregon, surrounded by endless pine-covered hills and dirt roads barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass, was a town so small it didn't even show up on most maps. Maplewood, a place where doors were left unlocked, dogs roamed freely, and everyone at the diner knew how you liked your coffee. Time moved slower there, not out of laziness, but because no one was in a rush to leave. On the outskirts of that quiet town stood a humble house that looked like it had stories to tell. Faded white wood paneling, shutters slightly crooked, and a small porch with 2 creaky steps that groaned under the weight of time. Wind chimes hung by the door, their soft music playing whenever the breeze rolled in from the mountains. In that house lived a little girl named Mabel Collins, and though she had only 5 years of life behind her, she carried a brightness that felt older than her age. Mabel was the kind of child who made people stop mid-sentence just to admire her, not because of beauty in the way adults often mean, but because she had something else, an alertness, a kind of innocent gravity in her gaze that made you feel she was watching everything, even the things you didn't say. Her light brown hair was always tied into 2 braids that her mother, Irene, made each morning before breakfast. The braids were never perfectly even, but Mabel didn't mind. She liked how her mother's fingers smelled faintly of lavender lotion and soap when they brushed through her hair. Their mornings began early, just before sunrise, when the mist still clung to the fields like a memory that refused to fade. Irene would hum softly as she packed lunches and made eggs, her voice a soothing, unbroken presence that filled the kitchen like sunlight. The smell of toast, butter, and percolated coffee drifted through the small house, waking the others slowly. First June, then Mabel, and finally Harris, who always tried to pretend he wasn't the last one out of bed. Harris was a man molded by hard work and habit. At 38, he carried the kind of strength you didn't boast about. It was in his hands, in the grease under his fingernails, and in the way his back ached after 12 hours at the garage. He wasn't the kind to talk about his feelings, but every evening, no matter how exhausted he was, he made it a point to sit beside Mabel, pull her close, and kiss her on the forehead. "Today is a special day, my star," he'd say, and she would smile wide, eyes half closed in sleep, and answer with a whisper, "Because I'm your star." That single sentence had become their secret code. It meant love. It meant home. June, Irene's aunt, and technically Mabel's great-aunt, brought a spark of unpredictability to the household. In her late 60s, she had lived through more than most people cared to ask about, but she rarely spoke of the past. Instead, she focused on the present with a mischief in her step and a laugh that often startled the neighbors. She smoked clove cigarettes behind the barn when she thought no one was looking, and wore brightly patterned dresses with sneakers. She made up wild bedtime stories about talking cows and grumpy trees, and Mabel believed every single word. To her, June was magic. Weekends in the Collins house had their own rhythm. Saturdays were for the flea market in town, where Irene hunted for old recipe books and teacups while Harris browsed tools he didn't need. Mabel loved the cluttered toy tables, where she'd spend long minutes deciding between faded teddy bears and plastic dinosaurs missing limbs. Sundays were slower. They made pancakes together, sometimes with blueberries, sometimes not. They tended to the small vegetable garden out back. Harris fixed things that didn't really need fixing. Irene read on the porch, and June fell asleep in the sun with a hat over her face. There were no big vacations, no theme parks, no luxuries. But there were endless games in the backyard, fireflies in the summer, cocoa in winter, and the safety of knowing that someone would always be there to tuck you in. Every scar on the wooden floors, every chipped plate in the cupboard, every photograph on the fridge, everything had a story. And Mabel was at the center of all of them. She didn't know fear. Not yet. The worst she had ever experienced was a skinned knee or a dropped scoop of ice cream. Her world was filled with security, softness, and the kind of joy that comes from being truly seen and deeply loved. But what no one in that house could have imagined, what none of them could see coming, was how fragile it all really was. Sometimes, the most perfect moments in life are the ones closest to falling apart. And in that house, in that little town where nothing ever changed, the quiet storm was already forming. They just didn't hear it yet. If you like interesting stories, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our content. And let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. We'd love to hear from you. It was one of those Saturdays that looked like it had been painted. The sky was a clear, uninterrupted blue, the kind that seemed to stretch forever, and the early spring air still carried the cold bite of mountain winds. Maplewood was awake, but slow-moving. The Collins family had finished their breakfast just past 8. Mabel had syrup on her chin, and June was humming some old tune from the 60s as she cleaned up the table. Harris, sipping his coffee, looked out through the window toward the driveway, where his truck sat under a thin layer of pollen dust. "I've been thinking," Irene said, wiping her hands on a dish towel, "I might take a quick trip up to the cabin today." Harris looked up from his mug. "Now? Just overnight? Maybe come back tomorrow evening. I haven't been up there in months." She paused. "I need a day, Harris. Just one." He didn't say anything right away. He rarely did when she brought things like that up. He'd look at her for a few seconds, weighing the silence, and then nod, the same way he had when they bought the house, when they decided to keep June with them, when she told him she was pregnant. "All right," he said, setting his coffee down. "You've earned it." June raised an eyebrow from the sink. "You sure you two can manage without me for one night?" "You're not the one leaving," Irene said, teasing. "I mean emotionally," June answered, and Mabel giggled. They all laughed together. It was an easy moment. Normal. Familiar. Irene packed light. Just a small duffel bag, her favorite sweater, and 2 books she'd been meaning to read. She kissed Harris on the cheek, hugged June a little longer than usual, and then turned to Mabel, kneeling down in front of her. "I'll be back before you even notice I'm gone, my love," she said, brushing a strand of hair from Mabel's face. But the little girl looked uncertain. She clung to her mother's neck, and her voice came out small, almost shaky. "Don't go, Mommy. Stay here." Irene's smile trembled, just slightly, but she kept it on. "I promise. Just one night." Mabel didn't answer. She simply nodded, eyes fixed on the floor, clutching her mother's hand until the last possible second. Irene kissed her once more, stood up, and walked out the door with the son behind her. They never saw her again. It was Harris who got the call. The phone rang at 4:27 in the afternoon. He was in the garage, under the hood of an old Ford pickup, and June was baking with Mabel in the kitchen. Cinnamon rolls, the way Irene used to make them. He wiped his hands, answered on the 3rd ring. "Mr. Collins?" "Yes, speaking." "This is Officer Delgado with the Multnomah County Sheriff's Department. I need to speak to you about your wife, Irene Collins. She was involved in a serious accident." That's all he remembered hearing. The rest came in fragments, like a nightmare whispered between consciousness and blackout. Runaway truck, mountain road, no time to swerve, vehicle crushed, fatal on impact. Words that didn't connect at first. They just floated around the room like dust in sunlight, meaningless until they weren't. The phone slid from his hand and clattered to the ground. June rushed in, saw the color gone from his face, and grabbed his shoulders. "What? Harris, what is it?" But he couldn't speak. He collapsed to his knees, breathing hard, the phone still buzzing with the voice of the officer on the other end. Mabel peeked around the corner, flour on her fingers, cheeks red from laughter only moments earlier. She looked at her father on the floor, at June's frozen expression, and her smile faded instantly. "Where's Mommy?" she asked, voice soft and uncertain. No one answered her. They couldn't. That night, the world inside the little house on the edge of Maplewood shattered. Dinner was left untouched on the table. The cinnamon rolls burned in the oven. Mabel waited by the window until the sky turned black, convinced her mother would walk up the gravel path at any second, duffel bag slung over her shoulder like nothing had happened. But no car came, no footsteps, just silence. And in that silence, something broke that would never fully repair again. The days after Irene's death passed in a blur, not like a storm. Storms came and went. This was more like fog. Thick, heavy. It clung to everything and refused to lift. Inside the Collins home, the air no longer smelled of cinnamon or lavender. The windows stayed closed, curtains half drawn. The radio, once playing soft oldies in the background, remained silent. Everything that had once felt alive about the house had vanished the moment Irene's heart stopped beating on that mountain road. Mabel didn't cry the first night, or the second. At 5 years old, she didn't understand the permanence of death. Not really. She just knew that her mother hadn't come back, and that no one was telling her when she would. She sat by the front window for hours each evening, waiting. She asked questions no one could answer. Was Mommy cold? Is she sleeping? Will she bring me a toy from the mountains when she comes home? Harris couldn't look her in the eyes. He tried. He really did. But every time he looked at her face, all he saw was Irene's eyes staring back at him. He couldn't separate the two. Her voice, her smile, her little hands, so much like her mother's. It was unbearable. He started leaving for the garage earlier and coming home later. Sometimes he didn't come home until Mabel was already asleep, or pretended to be. June noticed. She had stepped into the space that Irene once filled, without being asked. The cooking, the laundry, the bedtime routines. She did it all silently, without complaint, even when her back hurt or her legs gave out. She wiped Mabel's face, brushed her hair, packed her school bag, and held her when she cried, though Mabel never cried for long. Instead, she clung to the old stuffed bear her mother had given her for her 4th birthday. It had a missing eye and a torn ear, but Mabel held it tight every night, whispering secrets into its worn fur like it could carry messages to wherever Irene had gone. One evening, nearly a month after the funeral, Mabel crawled into bed beside June. She didn't say anything at first, just lay there, eyes wide open in the dark. Then came the whisper. "Do you think Mommy misses me?" June swallowed hard. She didn't want to cry in front of her. She had to be the strong one now. But that question hit her like a knife to the chest. "She misses you every second," June said. "Even more than you miss her." That answer seemed to satisfy the little girl. She nodded once and fell asleep within minutes. June didn't sleep at all. Harris, meanwhile, wasn't recovering. If anything, he was slipping further away. He'd lost weight. He barely spoke. He'd sit at the table and stare at his plate, or worse, go out to the garage and stay there for hours, just fixing and refixing the same old carburetor over and over again. And then, June disappeared. It was a Thursday, cold, grey, and unremarkable. She left in the morning like she always did, wearing her long beige coat and faded scarf, saying she had a dentist appointment in a nearby town. She never came back. At first, Harris thought maybe she'd gotten delayed. A flat tire, a long wait at the clinic, something explainable. But by nightfall, when Mabel began to ask why Aunt June wasn't back yet, the silence started to stretch too long. By morning, it had become fear. They called her phone, straight to voicemail. They drove to the clinic, She hadn't shown up. Checked with neighbors. No one had seen her. Her purse was gone. Her coat. But her toothbrush and slippers were still in the house. The police were called. Detectives searched her room. Her closet. Her car was missing too. Days passed, then weeks. Flyers were put up. The sheriff's office followed up on a few tips, but there were no signs of foul play. No credit card activity. No witnesses. No note. Eventually, the official report stated it plainly. June Holloway, presumed voluntary disappearance. Case remains open. But Harris knew better. Or maybe he just wanted to believe otherwise. That she had broken. That the weight of the grief, the pressure of raising a child that wasn't hers, had become too much. Whatever the reason, she was gone. Now it was just him and Mabel. And Harris. He wasn't fit to be anyone's father anymore. He fed her, dressed her, got her on the school bus. But it was mechanical, cold. No warmth, no joy, no stories at bedtime, no forehead kisses. No, my star. It was like he had turned into a ghost, haunting the house instead of living in it. And Mabel? She stopped asking questions. She no longer looked out the window. She stopped smiling. Her drawings changed too. They used to be full of color. Sunflowers, trees, people holding hands. Now, they were almost always in black. Houses with no windows. Stick figures with no faces. Storm clouds that covered the whole page. Her teachers noticed. They sent home notes. Called once or twice. But Harris barely returned their calls. He didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to talk about anything. He was drowning, and Mabel was silently sinking with him. Until one day, a stranger came to the door. The knock came just after 9 a.m. on a Thursday, when the clouds hung low and heavy, the kind of sky that felt like it was pressing down on the house itself. Mabel was seated at the kitchen table, staring into a bowl of dry cereal. The milk had run out 2 days ago. Harris had meant to go to the store, but like most things lately, it slipped through the cracks. He barely reacted to the knock at first. It was too soft, too polite, nothing urgent. But after a pause, it came again. Steady, gentle, as if whoever stood outside wasn't in a rush, but also wasn't planning to leave. Harris shuffled to the door, still in his oil-stained coveralls, even though he hadn't been to the garage in days. He opened it slowly, almost cautiously. Standing there was a young woman, early 20s, maybe. Slender frame, dark eyes, jet black hair pulled into a long braid that rested over her shoulder like it had been set there with care. She wore a simple beige sweater, dark jeans, and shoes that looked a little too clean for the muddy roads of Maplewood. "Hi," she said, voice soft but steady. "I'm Marlene, from the registry." Harris blinked. Registry. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Child care placement. 4 temporary in-home assistants. I was told. You applied. He didn't remember applying for anything. But then again, there were things people suggested. Friends of June's, maybe someone from church, a man from the garage. He had said yes to a lot without listening. It was possible. Still, he hesitated. I wasn't expecting anyone. I know, Marlene said, offering a small, knowing smile. But sometimes life sends help whether you expect it or not. He glanced back inside, saw Mabel still sitting quietly, her small fingers playing with the edge of the table. Something in him sagged. Come in. From that moment, something began to shift in the house. Marlene didn't try to replace Irene. That would have been impossible. But she moved through the home with a quiet confidence, like someone who didn't need permission to care. On her first day, she cleaned the dishes without being asked. By the second, she'd stocked the pantry and fridge with groceries. On the third, she brought back a new bottle of Mabel's favorite strawberry syrup, and the little girl smiled, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. She didn't ask many questions. She didn't pry. She didn't try too hard. That's what made her presence feel calming, natural, like she'd always belonged there but had simply arrived late. With Mabel, she was warm but not patronizing. She knelt to her level when speaking, never towered. She asked what games Mabel liked, what food she missed, what songs her mother used to sing. And when Mabel didn't answer, which she often didn't at first, Marlene would just smile and say, "That's okay. We'll figure it out together." She didn't push, but she stayed. Soon, Marlene was the one brushing Mabel's hair in the mornings, packing her school bag, folding her clothes. She baked small vanilla cupcakes with her after school, let her choose the sprinkles. She brought picture books from the library, and when she read them, her voice was steady, almost melodic. "You're my special helper," she'd say often, passing Mabel the measuring cup or asking her to stir the bowl. It was a phrase that began to root itself in Mabel's heart, like a soft little seed planted where grief had carved an empty space. And Harris? He watched it all like a man slowly waking up after being asleep for too long. The house had structure again. Meals were made. Mabel was talking, laughing, even. Her drawings had color. One morning, she handed him one of them. It was a picture of her, Marlene, and Harris standing under a blue sky with yellow flowers. He almost cried but didn't. Instead, he placed it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon and left the room before his voice cracked. He didn't ask where Marlene went when she wasn't there. He didn't know if she had a family, a car, or an apartment. All he knew was that she showed up every morning exactly at 8 o'clock, always in the same sweater or some soft variation of it, always with that calm, unshakable energy. She didn't feel like a stranger, and soon she stopped being one. By the end of the second week, Marlene was at the house more than Harris was. She began to take Mabel to school, pick her up, attend parent-teacher meetings, even scheduled a dentist appointment for the girl without being asked. Harris didn't resist. He was too tired, too relieved, and maybe just a little grateful. Still, there was something quiet about Marlene, something beneath the warmth that Mabel, in her innocence, couldn't quite name. Not fear, not suspicion, but a feeling that sometimes, when Marlene thought no one was looking, her smile faded too fast. Her eyes would drift, lost in a thought she never shared. It wasn't much, but it was just enough to leave a question floating in the air, one that neither Harris nor Mabel dared to ask. Who exactly was Marlene? It didn't happen all at once. There was no loud declaration, no sudden shift that could be pointed to and said, "That's when it changed." Instead, it crept in slowly, like ivy on the side of a house, quiet, persistent, and unnoticed until it was everywhere. At first, Harris was just tired. That's what he told himself, anyway. He'd come home from the garage, and the house would already be clean. Dinner was always warm, the kitchen table set. Mabel had her homework done, already in her pajamas. Marlene greeted him with a calm nod, always with something cooking or already plated. Her voice was soft, but there was no question about who had taken over. "You look exhausted," she said one evening, guiding him to the chair at the head of the table. "Sit. Eat. Let me worry about everything else." And he did. He let her. It wasn't just the meals. She organized the laundry schedule, rearranged the pantry, set reminders on a little chalkboard in the kitchen. Trash day, Thursday. Mabel's field trip, Tuesday. Water the plants. She even fixed the drawer in the hallway that had been stuck for months. Harris hadn't even noticed it until she pointed it out. He would come home to music playing quietly, soft instrumental piano, never anything with words, the scent of lemon oil in the air, a candle lit in the bathroom. For the first time in nearly a year, the house didn't feel heavy. But with that peace came something else. Control. Marlene began choosing Mabel's clothes for school, laid them out each night. Not just shirts and pants, but matching socks, hair ties, even accessories. When Mabel protested, saying she wanted to wear her rainbow dress, Marlene smiled and said, "That one's not warm enough, sweetheart. Let's go with this instead." And somehow, Mabel always did. She began to handle Mabel's playdates too, then quietly cancelled them. "She's been tired," Marlene would explain. "Too much stimulation at her age can be overwhelming." Teachers began noticing she no longer stayed after school for arts and crafts club. Harris, unaware, simply nodded when Marlene updated him. "We're keeping things calm and structured. That's what she needs." Soon, bedtime was no longer a flexible event. It was precisely 8 o'clock. No exceptions. No more late-night stories from Harris. No whispered, "my star," as he tucked her in. Mabel had once asked if her father could tell her a story like before. Marlene smiled, gently touched her hair, and said, "He's tired, honey. Let him rest. I'll tell you a story instead." And she did. Her stories were different, perfectly told, structured, tidy. But they lacked something. Mabel couldn't explain what. They didn't feel like home. Still, she listened, because resisting always led to a new rule. In just a few weeks, it was Marlene who decided what Mabel ate, when she napped, what shows she could watch, which books she could borrow. She adjusted her bedtime stories to limit imaginative overstimulation. At school, Marlene spoke with teachers on Harris's behalf. She asked them not to assign group projects that could cause Mabel social fatigue. The school counselor tried calling Harris once to discuss Mabel's withdrawn behavior. Marlene answered instead. "She's fine," she said firmly. "She just doesn't respond well to outsiders." That week, Mabel stopped drawing colorful skies and started drawing houses with closed doors and no windows. Even the weekends changed. Harris used to take Mabel to the local park on Saturdays. Just the two of them. Swings, juice boxes, ducks by the pond. One weekend, when he tried to take her out, Marlene stepped in at the door. "Don't you think she'd be better off resting today? She's been showing signs of overstimulation this week." He hesitated, looked at Mabel, her small hand in his. She didn't say anything, just waited for him to decide. He sighed and turned back inside. Maybe next week. But next week never came. Every plan Harris made to reconnect with his daughter, Marlene would adjust. A last-minute errand, a mild fever, an early nap. Little things. Just enough to throw off the timing. And Harris, emotionally exhausted and guilt-ridden, didn't push back. She made his life easier. That's what he told himself. She was organized, gentle, consistent. She spoke kindly, smiled often, but always got her way. And yet, if anyone had looked closely, closer than Harris ever dared, they might have noticed that Mabel, though well-fed and neatly dressed, had grown quieter. Her drawings were tidier but lifeless. She stopped asking questions. stopped laughing as much, stopped dreaming out loud. She wasn't scared of Marlene. Not exactly. But she didn't trust her either. Not fully. There was something behind that warm voice and quiet smile that Mabel couldn't name, but she felt it. And children always feel what adults are too distracted to see. One night, after Marlene tucked her in and turned off the light, Mabel whispered into the dark, as if her words could find their way to someone beyond the walls. "Mommy, are you still watching?" By the time summer rolled into Maplewood, the quiet shift in the Collins household had already settled into something permanent. But it wasn't peace. It was something colder, still, controlled. The house remained clean, as always. The pantry was stocked, clothes folded perfectly, curtains changed with the season, fresh flowers on the table. On the surface, everything appeared better than it had in months. But something essential had gone missing. Harris sat at the table most nights with his hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug of coffee, staring blankly at the news playing on low volume. He was there, physically, but only in fragments. He worked. He ate. He slept. But the part of him that had once come alive around his daughter, the part that told stories, whispered nicknames, scooped her into his arms with playful growls, that part was gone. Or worse, asleep. Mabel, now 6, had stopped trying to wake him up. She used to try, leaving drawings on his pillow, asking to go to the park, suggesting they cook pancakes like they used to. The answer was always the same: maybe later, or I'm tired, or ask Marlene. But Marlene didn't like pancakes, or cartoons before bed, or late-night giggles under the blankets. What Marlene liked was quiet, order, and routine. Every morning followed the same script. Wake at 7. Wash, dress, eat. Backpack by the door. Marlene with her neat braid and soft voice waiting like clockwork. "Good morning, sweetheart," she'd say, placing a perfectly sliced apple beside a bowl of oatmeal. "Today's going to be a focused day. Remember what we talked about? Calm mind, calm body." Mabel nodded. She always nodded, even when she wanted to scream. At school, the changes were becoming noticeable. Teachers reported that Mabel no longer volunteered answers. She rarely played with the other children. During recess, she sat on a bench drawing quietly. Always houses. Always the same shape. No doors. One afternoon, her art teacher crouched beside her and asked, "Why don't your houses have doors, Mabel?" Mabel looked up, startled, like she hadn't realized someone was watching. She shrugged. "Because nobody comes in," she whispered. At home, Marlene's control had grown tighter. Every decision filtered through her. What Mabel wore, what she read, who she could speak to, even the volume of the television. Mabel wasn't allowed to pick her own bedtime story anymore. Marlene had selected a rotation of approved books, ones with quiet messages, soft tones, and no strong emotions. She said they were better for Mabel's emotional regulation. One evening, Mabel snuck a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are under her pillow. It was the book her mother used to read, with voices and howls and laughter. She waited until Marlene turned off the lights and left the room, then pulled it out and whispered the story to herself, finger tracing the pictures in the dark. The next morning, the book was gone. Nothing was said. It was just missing. And when Mabel asked where it went, Marlene only replied with a gentle smile, "I think it's time we make room for new stories." That night, Mabel didn't ask for any. Even the smallest of joys had begun to vanish. Once, Mabel found an old photograph of her and her mother in the back of a kitchen drawer. They were sitting on the porch, both with their hair in matching braids, mouths wide open in laughter. She held onto it like treasure. tucked it beneath her pillow. The next week, it too disappeared. Marlene never mentioned it. But Mabel knew. She knew the same way you know when someone's been in your room, not because anything is broken, but because something suddenly feels off. The worst moment came one Friday afternoon. Mabel had been practicing a small dance routine at school. Nothing grand, just a class performance. The teacher sent home a note inviting parents to attend. Mabel gave it to Harris herself, placing it gently into his calloused hands, eyes full of hope. "Will you come?" she asked. He blinked, tired, glanced at the paper, nodded. "Sure, I'll be there." For 2 days, she talked about it to anyone who'd listen, even Marlene. But when the day arrived, he didn't show. The teacher gently pulled her aside after the performance. "Maybe he got caught up at work," she said kindly. Mabel just nodded. That night, Harris found the drawing she'd made for him on the kitchen counter, a colorful sketch of her in a yellow dress, on stage, waving. In the corner, she had drawn a stick figure meant to be him, with the word "Dad" written over it. The stick figure had a smile. He stared at it for a long time. When he finally walked to her room to say goodnight, she was already turned toward the wall. Quiet. Small. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low. "It's okay," she replied. But it wasn't. It hadn't been okay for a long time. She fell asleep holding her stuffed bear, the one her mother gave her. It was missing an eye now. The stitching was starting to fray. But she wouldn't let it go, because it was the last thing left that hadn't been taken away. If you're enjoying this story, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our content. It was a Sunday morning that started like any other. Overcast skies blanketed Maplewood, soft rain tapping lightly on the windows. The smell of oatmeal lingered in the kitchen. Mabel sat at the table, legs dangling from the chair, quietly eating with slow, robotic movements. Across the room, Harris stood with a mug in hand, watching her in silence. For some reason, maybe guilt, maybe something deeper, he suddenly spoke. "Want to go to the park today?" Mabel looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. "Just you and me?" she asked cautiously. He hesitated, and in that tiny pause, the door behind them opened, and Marlene stepped into the room. "I think it might rain later," she said too gently. "Perhaps it's better to stay in today. We could bake or read." But Harris, whether driven by shame for missing the school performance or something stirring beneath his fog, shook his head. "No, we're going." Mabel smiled. A real one, the kind she hadn't shown in weeks. "I'll get my boots," she shouted, already running toward the bedroom. Marlene stood still. Her eyes didn't move from Harris's face. He avoided her gaze. "I'll come too," she said after a long pause. He looked at her, surprised. "I thought you said we should stay in." Her tone didn't change. "If it starts raining, she'll need her jacket. And her asthma's been acting up. She hasn't had an episode in months." Still, he didn't stop her. Part of him was too tired to argue. Another part had grown used to letting her decide. So, Marlene came. They took Harris's truck, the same old pickup he'd had since before Mabel was born. The engine grumbled awake, the wipers swiping away the mist clinging to the windshield. Marlene sat in the passenger seat, her posture straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. Mabel sat in the back, humming softly to herself, clutching her stuffed bear despite the worn fabric and frayed seams. They didn't get far. They were approaching an intersection near the outer edge of town, the one with the faded stop sign that had been the subject of town hall complaints for years. Harris slowed, looked both ways, then gently pressed the gas. That's when the other car came. A silver sedan. Too fast. Ignoring the red light. Harris barely had time to turn his head. The impact came with a deafening metal scream. The truck spun, glass shattering, tires skidding against wet asphalt. Mabel's scream was sharp, high-pitched and short, cut off by the world turning sideways. Then silence. When it was over, the truck had collided with a telephone pole, the front end crumpled like paper. Smoke hissed from the hood. Rain began to fall harder. Inside the vehicle, Mabel was conscious, bruised, shaken. Blood ran from a cut on her forehead, but her eyes were open, blinking through tears and confusion. Marlene sat still, entirely untouched. Not a single scratch. And Harris, his head had slammed against the steering wheel. Blood pooled behind his ear. His breathing was shallow. His face was pale. He didn't move. Mabel screamed his name. "Daddy!" Nothing. People came. Sirens followed. The next hour was chaos. Paramedics. Police. Questions. 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 At the hospital, Mabel waited in a hard plastic chair, her small hand wrapped in gauze, her stuffed bear on her lap. Marlene sat beside her, arms crossed, calm as ever. The doctor finally came. Mild concussion for the child. Some bruised ribs, he said. But the father. Marlene stood. "What about him?" she asked, quicker than Mabel could. "He's stable, but unconscious. The head trauma caused some damage. We're observing memory disruption, possible retrograde amnesia. Right now, he doesn't seem to recognize faces, including his daughter's." Mabel's breath caught. "What does that mean?" she asked, looking up at the doctor, tears forming. The man crouched to her level. "It means your daddy is very sick. He needs time. He may remember you, or he may not." The words shattered something inside her that had only just begun to mend. Later that night, she was allowed to see him. He lay in the hospital bed, eyes open but distant. Machines beeped softly around him. She stepped closer, holding her bear tight to her chest. "Daddy," she whispered. He turned his head, looked at her, but there was nothing in his eyes. Not warmth, not pain, just polite confusion. "I'm sorry," he said slowly. "Do I know you?" Mabel didn't respond. She couldn't. Her lips trembled, and tears streamed silently down her face. Marlene stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "He needs rest," she said. "Let's not upset him." In the days that followed, Harris was discharged and returned home, physically present, but emotionally absent. He remembered how to use tools, how to eat, how to sleep. But Mabel, she was a stranger to him. And Marlene, she stepped into the empty space without hesitation. "Let me take care of everything," she told the doctor. "He needs calm, stability. I'll manage the household." And somehow, no one questioned it. She was trusted, efficient, always prepared. She filled out the forms. She signed the discharge paperwork. She even coordinated his follow-up appointments. At home, Marlene now controlled it all. Harris, confused and docile, followed her lead, and Mabel watched in silence as the last piece of her world slipped just a little further away. The rain had been falling all day, cold, steady, relentless. By the time night settled over Maplewood, the streets shimmered beneath the streetlights, reflections dancing in puddles like ghosts with nowhere to go. Inside the Collins house, The warmth of the fireplace flickered weakly against the silence that had grown thicker in recent weeks. Mabel sat by the window, her breath fogging the glass. She wasn't waiting for anything. Not anymore. Not really. But something about the rain made her restless. She gripped her bear tighter, the fabric nearly threadbare now, and whispered, "I miss you, Mommy." Then she added, more quietly, "And you too, Aunt June." She hadn't said that name aloud in a long time. No one did. As far as the world was concerned, June Holloway had disappeared without a trace. But Mabel hadn't forgotten. Not the way she used to braid her hair while singing off-key. Not the way she made hot chocolate with a dash of cinnamon. Not the way she made the world feel lighter, like things could still be okay even when they weren't. That night, Mabel did something she hadn't done in months. She tried to run away. It wasn't a plan, not really. Just a sudden ache, a need to be anywhere else. She slipped on her raincoat, tucked her bear under one arm, and tiptoed down the hallway. Marlene's bedroom door was shut. Harris's room was dark. He had been sleeping earlier and likely still was. He spent most days wandering through his memory loss like a maze with no exit. Mabel opened the front door slowly. The wind caught it, pulling it open wider. She stepped out barefoot, the porch cold and wet beneath her feet. But as she reached the last step, a shadow moved in the rain. She froze. At first, it was just a shape. A figure under a long, hooded coat, hunched from the cold, moving slowly up the driveway. Lightning flashed, and in that single moment, Mabel's heart stopped. Aunt June! The figure raised her head. It was her. Hair soaked, eyes sunken, older, thinner, but unmistakable. June was alive. She dropped to her knees on the porch, arms open. "Oh my God, Mabel," she whispered, voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." Mabel ran into her arms. They stayed there, wrapped together, the rain pouring down around them. Inside, no one had noticed the door was open. June held the girl tightly, pressing her cheek against Mabel's soaked hair. "I never wanted to leave you," she said. "But she made me go." It was then that Mabel pulled back, confused. "She who?" June's jaw tightened. "Marlene." It didn't make sense at first. The same woman who folded their clothes, who made the house feel clean and safe again. How? "She manipulated me, Mabel," June said, her voice trembling with rage and shame. "She told me I was making things worse, that I was confusing your father, that I was interfering with your healing." Mabel shook her head. "But you wouldn't leave." "I didn't mean to. I just needed one night to think," she said, looking down. "She offered to drive me home after we argued, but she didn't take me home. She drove me out to a motel outside of Portland, took my phone, my purse, said she'd tell everyone I abandoned you, and the next morning, she was gone." Mabel blinked. Why would she do that? June hesitated. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a plastic folder, damp from the rain. Inside were printed pages, documents, bank statements, and several photographs. "Because she wasn't here to help," June said. "She was here for control." Over the next hour, they sat huddled in the basement, the old one June used to use for storage and pickling jars, the one Marlene never went near. June laid out the papers one by one, explaining everything in a whisper. Marlene had multiple aliases across several states, records of employment under different names. She'd worked as a caretaker, a live-in nanny, a companion, but always for families going through grief, always after tragedy. In one case, the family had lost a child. The mother later ended up institutionalized. In another, the father signed over power of attorney without realizing it. The pattern was clear and horrifying. June had tracked down the records, gathered what she could, but without access to the house, to Harris, to Mabel, there wasn't much she could do. Until now. She wants everything, June said. The house, the bank account. She's already changed the utilities into her name. Next, she'll go after custody. Mabel's voice cracked. But Daddy won't let her. June looked down. Honey, he doesn't remember you. The words hit like a punch. But we're going to fix it, June said quickly. We're going to wake him up. We're going to remind him who he is, who you are, and we're going to get her out of this house for good. Mabel wiped her tears. She was scared, but for the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. They sat together in the basement, under the dim yellow light of a single bulb, as the storm raged above them. And they made a plan. It was just after 2 in the morning when they moved. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled of rain and wet earth. The wind had died down, leaving only the soft creaking of the trees around the Collins house. From the outside, it looked calm, normal. The porch light buzzed faintly, the windows dark. But inside, something was shifting, something that had been building for months. June and Mabel crept up from the basement with quiet, practiced movements. June held the folder close to her chest, wrapped in a plastic bag to keep the evidence dry. Mabel clutched her bear tightly, but her steps were firm. She wasn't the same little girl who used to hide under blankets and cry alone at night. Not anymore. They entered through the back door. June had remembered that the lock hadn't worked properly since before she left. Harris never fixed it. Too many other things had broken first. The kitchen was dark, but the smell of mint tea lingered faintly in the air, still warm from the pot Marlene had likely prepared before going to bed. Only she wasn't in bed. She was waiting. In the living room, Marlene sat calmly in the armchair, legs crossed, a book open on her lap. She didn't flinch when June turned on the light. She didn't even blink. "I knew you'd come back," she said. Her voice was smooth, cold beneath the surface, measured, controlled. "As always." "I'm not here to talk," June replied, stepping forward. "I'm here to finish this." Marlene stood slowly, marking her page before closing the book. "You've upset the child," she said, casting a brief glance at Mabel, who stood behind June, watching silently. "I protected her," June said. "From you." Marlene tilted her head, almost amused. "Protected her from what? Clean clothes? Hot meals? A quiet home? I gave her what no one else could, structure." "No," June said. "You took everything familiar, everything real, and replaced it with control. You isolated her. You tried to erase who she was, just like you've done before." Harris appeared in the hallway then, barefoot, eyes heavy with confusion. "What's going on?" he asked, rubbing his forehead. "Who are you talking to?" June turned toward him, gently. "It's okay, Harris. Just listen." Marlene's tone changed instantly, lower, more desperate, but still wearing the mask of calm. "She's trying to confuse you again," she said, stepping closer to him. "You need to rest. Please, come sit." June didn't flinch. She pulled the folder from the bag and opened it on the coffee table. "Look at these, Harris." He hesitated, glancing at the papers. Copies of IDs with different names, financial records, police reports, caregiver complaints, witness statements. All the pieces of Marlene's carefully constructed past, laid bare. Marlene stepped back, her eyes now darting between the folder and June. "She's lying," she said. "This is an attack. She never wanted what was best for you." Harris stared at the documents. His hand trembled slightly as he reached out to touch one, and then his eyes landed on a photo, an old one, a picture of him, Irene, and Mabel at the park years ago. He was holding Mabel on his shoulders. Irene was laughing, her head tilted back, sunlight hitting her face just right. Something cracked inside him. A sound. A memory. Estrella. The word came out broken, strained. But it was real. Mabel stepped forward, eyes filling. "Daddy!" Harris turned to her slowly, blinking like he was waking from a deep sleep. I know you," he whispered. Tears rolled down Mabel's cheeks. She ran to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his chest. He hugged her back, not loosely, not confused. He held her like a father. Marlene's expression changed in an instant, from calculated composure to something jagged, unstable. For the first time, her smile faltered. "You don't understand what you're doing," she snapped, her voice suddenly sharp, desperate. "I kept this house running. I held this family together. I gave you a life." "No," June said, stepping in front of Mabel. "You stole it." The sirens came next. June had called the police hours before. She'd waited, hidden in the basement with Mabel, until they were sure Harris had seen the truth for himself. 2 officers stepped inside, weapons holstered but firm in their stance. "Marlene Hayes," one said, "you're under arrest." She didn't resist at first, but as they reached for her wrists, she snapped. "Don't touch me," she screamed, pulling away, eyes wild now. "You don't know what I've done for this family. I was perfect. I made everything better." The officers restrained her, guiding her toward the door. As they walked her out, she locked eyes with Mabel. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "He'll forget you again. They always do." June stepped between them, blocking her view. "No, he won't," she said. Marlene was gone within minutes, shoved into the back of a patrol car, still ranting. The house fell into silence. A new kind of silence. This one wasn't cold. It was clean, honest, full of air again. Harris sat down heavily on the couch, his face pale, overwhelmed. He looked at Mabel again, really looked at her. "You're my daughter," he said, as if trying the words out for the first time. Mabel nodded slowly, climbing into his arms. "I missed you," she whispered. And this time, he didn't say, "I'm sorry." He just held her, and didn't let go. The following days passed in a strange, fragile quiet. The house felt different, as if something heavy had been lifted, but not completely removed, like a window cracked open after years of being shut. The air still carried the scent of tension, but there was finally space to breathe. Marlene was gone, officially facing charges for identity fraud, coercive control, and theft under multiple aliases across state lines. June's evidence had held up. She'd given the investigators everything: documents, statements, timelines. The lead detective called her a miracle in sneakers. She just laughed and said, "About time someone listened." But justice didn't instantly fix what had been broken. It didn't bring Irene back. It didn't erase the months of silence, the distance, or the ache Mabel had carried in her tiny chest. It didn't fix Harris overnight. He spent hours in the garage, surrounded by tools he didn't remember how to use. Sometimes he'd pick one up, stare at it for minutes, then quietly set it back down. His memories came in pieces, blurry images, a laugh in the distance, the scent of Irene's hair, the feel of a small hand in his. He wrote them down in a notebook June had bought him. "Pages will come back before the whole book," she told him. Mabel was patient. She didn't push. She simply stayed close, drew quietly beside him while he wrote. She began speaking more, telling him about her day, her school projects, her favorite color, which had changed again. It was now orange, but only the soft kind, not the bright one. Sometimes, Harris would respond. Other times, he just listened. But every night, without fail, he kissed her forehead and whispered, "Today is a special day. My star." The first time he said it again, Mabel cried silently into her pillow. June stayed with them full-time now. She'd reclaimed her old room, reopened the basement to the light, and planted new flowers in the backyard. She brought life back to the kitchen, her messy, chaotic, wonderful kind of life. She let Mabel bake again, with too much sugar and too little order, just the way Irene had. The house started to feel real again. Not perfect, not polished, but real. One evening, while cleaning out the closet where Marlene had kept her things, they found a box Mabel had never seen before. Inside were several of her drawings, ones she thought had been thrown away. The park picture, the yellow dress, the faceless stick figures. June sat beside her as she flipped through them, her small fingers trembling slightly. "She kept them," Mabel said, almost confused. "She wanted to erase you," June replied, "but even she knew she couldn't." They burned the box in the backyard that night. Just past dusk, under a sky filled with stars, Harris stood behind Mabel and June as the flames flickered high, swallowing every trace of the woman who had tried to take over their lives. Mabel tossed in the last page, her old drawing of a house with no doors, and watched it curl and turn to ash. The next morning, she drew a new one. This time, the house had 3 windows, a wide open door, a tree with a swing, and 3 people holding hands on the porch. She placed it on the fridge with the lemon magnet. Later that evening, Harris walked into the kitchen, glanced at the picture, and smiled. "I remember that swing," he said softly. And just like that, another page came back. The healing was slow. There were moments of sadness still. Nights when Mabel woke from dreams she didn't want to remember. Days when Harris sat staring out the window too long. But now, they had each other to hold on to in those moments. They didn't try to go back to the way things were. They started new, brick by brick, day by day. And in the quiet rhythm of their little home on the edge of Maplewood, life began again. Imperfect, but real, and filled, once more, with love. And if you like this story, you'll surely love the next one appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and turn on notifications. See you next time.